Hey guys, welcome back. Tisha here, back with our first ever Queen Charlotte a Bridgerton story review. I'm not gonna rush this. I'm warning you all now. It took me a while to do this. It took me a while to take notes. I started a while ago. I stopped. I came back. I said, now that I'm done with season 3, I owe it to you guys who stuck with me to now review the Queen story. Let me start off by saying that this is my favorite Bridgerton story. So as I said earlier, we might be here for a while. Go ahead, do me a favor and hit the like button as we begin with our favorite narrator. Dearest gentle reader, this is the story of Queen Charlotte from Bridgerton. It is not a history lesson. It is fiction inspired by fact. All liberties taken by the author are quite intentional. Enjoy. Join me in Germany, where the British palace footmen are smirking and laughing and chuckling outside of what looks like a mansion. We see Charlotte, who is peeking and listening outside a door as there are talks going on with her brother Adolphus and another gentleman. She is not involved in any part of this process, yet all of this talking that we're seeing is in regards to her. So papers are signed, an agreement is made, and she seems like she is in utter disbelief. She then throws a statue, the head, what do they call it? The bust of a statue that was on a pillar, picks it up and slams it down on the floor as we see it shatter into many pieces. And she hurries down the hallway. And just like that, we are exposed to the temper of Charlotte. We return to see Charlotte and her brother going into a carriage as she looks back at what she's leaving. They're then traveling from what we learn is from Germany to England, but they aren't traveling to visit family or friends. Instead, what they are traveling for is for her wedding. And we see very quickly that she is not happy about this. She doesn't want to do it. And her brother sees that she's upset, and he decides that he wants to poke the bear by talking to her and asking her why she's sitting the way that she's sitting, even though they've been in this carriage for what we learn is for over 6 hours, to the point where he says to her, "You haven't moved in 6 hours." And she responds in the way that only our queen can. She says, "I am wearing silk, encrusted with Indian sapphires, working with overlay of 200-year-old lace. Apparently, too much movement can cause the sapphires to shred the lace. If that were not enough, the gown sits atop underpinning made of whalebone, the bones of whales. Whales died so I could look like this. All the finest corsets are made of whalebone. The problem with whalebone is that it is rather delicate and also very, very sharp. Also, this corset is quite snug, so that I give the appearance of a statue, ridiculous to the eye, but that is because I cannot move, and because I must arrive on display. I am forced into a ludicrous gown, so stylish that if I move too much, I might be sliced and stabbed to death by my undergarments." Oh, how joyful it is to be a lady. When I say that she said all of that in one breath, she said all of that in one breath. And I am laughing because of how matter of fact she is when she says it, showing that even at her young age, that she was this person that we see later on. Her brother says, "You are upset, emotional. I understand." She says, "Do you understand truly?" This I would love to hear, because I'm not upset, nor am I emotional. I am angry and I cannot breathe. And both are thanks to you, brother. I said, "Oh, okay. She's pissed, and she has every right to be. He tells her it is an honor that she was chosen. But Charlotte isn't trying to hear that, because in her eyes, there are really basic requirements that it takes to be chosen. She's like, okay, so basically to be chosen, you have to be someone who can make lots of babies, who can read, someone with social graces, a royal bloodline. In my eyes, she tells him, I don't want it. They should have chosen somebody stupid enough to want this, because I don't want it. Showing us once again, this is not what she wants. And that she's basically being handed off, being sold. And back then, arranged marriages were a real thing. So even though this is clearly not what she wants, she doesn't have a say. She says, why me? He could have anyone, and yet they come hunting all the way across the continent for me. I am a stranger to them. They wanted me, a stranger, and it could not be a good reason. I know it cannot be a good reason, because you have not looked at me in the eye since you told me. She didn't know it then, but she was right. There's a reason why they went to a whole nother country in order to find the king, his queen. And if you've watched the series long enough, you already know that there... I don't want to give it away for people who don't know, but no, I'm just going to say it. We already know that the king has issues. So they sought elsewhere because the king had issues. Now, at this point in the show, we don't know what it is yet, but we'll get to it once we get to it in a later episode. Her brother tells her, I signed the betrothal contract. You are getting married. She's like, no, let me out. I want to go. I don't want to do this. He says, Charlotte, I know I should have taken a firmer hand with you when Mama and Papa died. I allowed you to read too much, and I indulged your every whim and frivolity. So I take full responsibility for the fact that you are now exceedingly headstrong and mistakenly think you can make a choice. You cannot. I am in charge. I said, oh, wow. Imagine having someone else make choices, not just for you, but for your body, because they're a man in the situation. That is scary. And that was happening, what was happening back then. Some people are trying to make it happen now, but let's stick to this. He said, this is happening. They are the British Empire, and we are a tiny province in Germany. We had no choice. I had no choice. The music changes. He said, there is no good reason. In fact, the reason might be terrible. I know that no one who looks like you or me has ever married one of these people ever. But I cannot question, because I cannot make an enemy of the most powerful nation on earth. It is done. So shut up. Do your duty to our country and be happy. He realizes that he's being really harsh with her. So he grabs her hands and he leans in. He says, I'm sorry, but there are worse fates than marrying the King of England. Her response to all of that, to everything that he said, is, sit back. You are endangering my gown. I need to look perfect when I arrive. Do I not? So she, at this point, gets it. She has a duty to her brother and to her country. And because of how she's been taught, and because of how she's been raised, and because of how women are looked upon in society, she has to just do what is told of her. During this episode, we flash back and forth to present day and to back then. So we're back at present day. I love how they show young Charlotte versus current Charlotte. I don't want to call her old Charlotte, but I'm going to try to say young and current, okay? It is late, and current Charlotte has been alerted to some disturbing news from the doctor. She asks, as soon as he comes in, is he dead? Referring to the king. Now, before watching this series, I thought, like, why is she always asking, is he dead? She's so cruel to always ask if she's dead. She really must not want to be married to the man if she's always asking, is he dead? But in watching this, I came to learn that it was something completely different. We'll get to it when we get to it. She's told no. She says, it is treasonous to interrupt my beauty sleep. You're lucky my face is a rare jewel. If I could still have people beheaded, you would be in the queue. And he's looking at her like, she's looking at him like, The doctor came there to tell you someone's dead, and you fussing at him for telling you that someone's dead. So then she pauses and she's like, Doctor, if the king is not dead, then who is? And this is when we're joined again by our favorite narrator. Dearest gentle reader, this coldest time of year has become that much colder with the sad news of the death of the Princess Royal. The granddaughter of our dear King George III and Queen Charlotte died in childbirth along with her baby. We see her laying there in a casket, and we see someone who we later learn is her son, because obviously this is the granddaughter, sobbing heavily. As the queen says to him as he's crying, sorrows, sorrows, prayers, sorrows. No emotion, just sorrows, prayers. And while our hearts grieve for the loss of the Princess Royal, our heads grieve more for the future of the monarchy itself. For the crown now has a crisis on its hands, a crisis one can only imagine that Queen Charlotte must find galling after ruling over the matchmaking efforts of the town and the marriage mart with such an iron fist. This author and all of England can only hope that the Queen Charlotte finally turns her matchmaking energies onto her own family. After all, Her Majesty has 13 children and now not a royal heir from any of them, at least not a legitimate one. We then see the Queen walk past different portraits that were done over the years of both herself and, the king and the kids and all those other things. And she's pausing as she's looking, and the whistle down continues. It causes one to wonder, is the queen's knowledge of how making a good marriage nothing but talk? I said, oh, okay. She's coming in heavy. We then go back to young Charlotte, who is walking the same hall that the queen that of current is currently walking in, and she stands there. Upon arrival, she is immediately put on display. She is being inspected by Princess Augusta, who is checking her teeth, who's asking to see her hands, who's looking at her hips, finally then declaring that Charlotte's hips will make lots of babies, which is good and which is her job. There's something as I'm watching it that's so unsettling about a white woman inspecting a black woman this way. I personally cannot help but make a correlation to this situation in slavery, because this is what was done to slaves. They purchased them based on their brawn, based on their appearance. And that is kind of what they were doing here. They were seeing if she was good enough to bear his children. She then walks up to her, and I'm guessing she never saw a beauty mark or something, because she takes her finger, she licks her thumb, takes it and goes like this to wipe it off. Now, I don't know if she was trying to wipe off the beauty mark or see if she could wipe off the brown. She lets her know she'll do, but she's going to have to make sure that she changes her gown for the ceremony. Charlotte tells the queen that she has a wedding gown that she would like to wear. She got it made. She's really excited about it. And Princess Augusta tells her, no, like, you're going to wear our gown. Our traditional wedding gown is very important. They go, back and forth nicely about it. But Charlotte reluctantly agrees, not that she really had a choice. They then leave, and we are introduced to Brimsley, who is following behind her. So Brimsley has been with her from the very beginning, right? He lets her know that he will always be there for her, being 5 paces behind. She's trying to find out about the king, but Brimsley isn't giving her any details and telling her anything that she wants to know. He's telling her everything that she already knows. Meanwhile, Princess Augusta and her advisors are in another room, taking a moment to try to collect their thoughts, because apparently no one realized that they agreed for their king to marry this black woman. Because all you keep hearing is, she is quite brown. She is very brown. She is quite brown. Let's be clear. Quite brown is too brown for the palace, because she keeps talking about the brownness a lot during this scene. They're going back and forth about what they should do. And advisors are like, trade deals are already in place and the wedding is today, so it's too late to cancel. It won't look good. So the princess doing as women do, taking over, decides that they have to do something to fix this situation, saying her being brown, well, it is only a problem if the palace says it's a problem. So she decides that they have to send out additional invites. They're going to do something that they've never done, what will be later called the Great Experiment. So they issue additional invites to the wedding for people to come and also for people to be a part of Charlotte's court. Even though it's the actual wedding day, who's going to decline being able to witness a royal wedding? I know I wouldn't. You could have hit me up an hour before and I've been like, oh, I'll find something. Funny how racism in this instance is ended because of marriage, or maybe we'll say segregation is ended because of marriage. If only it were that easy, right? It's clear that the rest of the court later on, though, struggles with it. But Princess Augusta does what she wants. And even though we have yet to see the king or see her speak with the king, she insists that this is what the king wanted. Without any hesitation, invitations are sent out. But this time it's to people who look more like Charlotte, to the point where everybody's brown. And if they're not brown, then they are people of color. Invitations are delivered to all the wealthy people of color, which is how we are introduced to many of our favorites, Agatha Danbury. I loved watching the character development of Agatha, and I wish that we have more. Even though that the new series season 4 isn't coming until way, way away, I think that they are doing us a disservice if they don't pick up something with either her or a combination of some of the other people that we saw in this, because they have a lot that they can give us. And it shows us how she made a name for herself. So upon our introduction, poor Agatha is staring up at the ceiling as she is being slammed into the headboard over and over again, with the bed creaking as her much older husband, it looks like he's a grandfather compared to her, is having sex with her. She is completely disengaged to the point where as soon as it's over, she cannot get out of the bed and into the bath fast enough. When she leaves, he's asleep, and she's complaining about not being warned by the staff that he wanted to sleep with her. She says, and he says he has another surprise, and her fear is that he's going to want to have sex again. Because whenever he gets excited, that's what he wants to do. She is told that they got an invite to attend the royal wedding, and that's why he wanted to do something to celebrate. And Agatha is like, there's no way that we got invited to that. Our kind doesn't mingle with them. And she's perplexed at why they're getting the invite, saying that our sides, they just don't mix ever. She finds out also that she's to be a part of the Queen's court. So she's like, you know what? I'm going to go. I got to see what this is about. Back at the palace, the Queen is still asking Brimsley and other staff questions about the king. She wants to know, is he handsome? Is he kind? Is he funny? Is he warm? Is he well-read, artistic, athletic? I mean, you're not answering that. Is he ugly? Perhaps deformed in some way because beauty is on the inside? Is he dull? Not very smart? Mentally slow? Is he cruel? All of those questions, and she's not getting responses. Instead, they keep changing the subject, saying things like, you're going to have wonderful children. That's not what she asked you. So Charlotte can't get out of there fast enough. She says, Brimsley, you said you're going to follow me everywhere. Does that mean you're going to follow me to the chamber pot as well? He tells her no, like basically she could be by herself when it comes to that. And she takes that time to act like she's going to go to the bathroom. But what she really does is she tries to escape the palace, and she ends up in the garden. So everyone is arriving at the palace. Princess Agatha greets all of the new guests, starting with the Danburys, but she does so in a way that she's never done before, because now at this point, they've gone from the Danburys to hello, Lord and Lady Danbury. She lets them know that all members of the town must be titled, and it is time that everyone is united. Now, Lady Danbury is getting it, But her husband isn't really getting it. And he's the one telling her not to stand there and looking crazy and all that other stuff. Meanwhile, he's the one looking crazy. Because Lady Danbury is like, okay, there's a reason why they're suddenly giving us titles. And I'm interested in seeing what it is. So she has her eye out for this stuff, okay? And she figures it out as soon as she sees the queen. So back to Charlotte. Charlotte's made a run for it and hasn't seen the man that she's supposed to wed. So she's sitting there trying to use the flowers and stuff on the wall to climb over the garden wall when this handsome stranger approaches. She tells the stranger that she thinks that she's going to be set to marry a beast or a troll, not knowing that the stranger, who seems to be very charming, is in fact the very king that she's supposed to marry. I love that. So she's like, look, I need your help. Can you, I'm going to grab that and I just need you to help lift me up so I can get over the wall. And he's watching her as he's doing this and he's amused by the situation. And he's basically like, I don't have any intention of helping you. I'm not going to help the lady escape that's supposed to marry me. And she's like, and we get a delightful exchange that is lengthy, but I'm going to read it because it kind of gives you a little context to their situation. He says, hello, Charlotte. I am George. She says, I am deeply your majesty. And she goes to, bow, and he gently grabs her hand. He holds her like this. And he says, not your majesty, George. She says, I mean, yes. No, he says, I mean, yes, your majesty, but to you, just George. She says, please accept my apologies. If I had known you were you, he said, you would have what? Not told me that you were trying to escape? She says, well, yes. And he laughs. She's like, I do apologize, your majesty. He says, George, just George. The king's situation, it towers over us. Accident of birth on my part, but I thought maybe perhaps as my wife, you could ignore it and I could just be George to you. That was, of course, before I found out that you do not want to be married to me. She's like, I didn't say that. He said, oh, yes, you did. She said, I didn't. He said, yes, you did. She said, it's not, I do not know you. He says, I do not know you either, except that you are terrible at climbing a wall. She says, you try climbing a wall in all of these garments. And he's looking at her. He's enamored with her. And she's like, what? And you can hear the music change up and it's playing all softly in the background. And he says, you are incomparable. No one told me that you'd be this beautiful. You may be too beautiful to marry me. People will talk, given that I'm a troll. She says, your majesty. He says, George. George. She says, she wants to know more about him. He says, what do you want to know? You do not know me. What do you want to know about me? She says, everything. He says, all right. Everything. I was born prematurely and everyone thought I was going to die, but I did not. I am a fair fencer or even a better shot. My favorite food is mutton. I will not eat fish. It's horrible. I like books and art and good conversation. Most of all, I like science. She says science. He says chemistry, physics, and botany, especially astronomy, the stars in the heavens. I'm quite the farmer. Probably would be a farmer if I were not already, occupied. I have a scar here from falling off my horse, a scar here from just being incredibly clumsy with a paring knife, and I am very nervous, and they laugh. About marrying a girl I'm only just meeting minutes before our wedding, but I cannot show it and climb over a wall because I am the king of Great Britain and Ireland, and that would cause a scandal, but I promise you I am neither a troll nor a beast, just George. As they're having this exchange, her brother comes up and he's fussing. We've been looking for you. We've been looking for you. And he pauses because he realizes this is the king. And he's like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Charlotte's just deciding if she wants to marry me. He's like, she's not deciding. She already knows. He's like, no, the choice is entirely up to her. He's like, now I got to get back because I suspect that by now there's probably some anxious guards trying to figure out where I'm at. He says, Charlotte, I hope to see you in there. And if so, I shall be the one standing next to the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he walks off. And I said, oh, I love this. Because her attempt to escape shows their chemistry. And she goes from being forced to marry him to now being a willing participant. So she's walked down the aisle by her brother and seems a little apprehensive at first. And she pauses. And Lady Danbury says, the pieces are falling into place. Her husband doesn't get it, but she sees now why all of these additional people were invited to this ceremony, which is because the color of their new queen. Charlotte makes eye contact with the king. They smile at each other, and then she continues walking. The ceremony is beautiful. We see the ring placed on her hand. The vows are recited as she smiles, and then they have their beautiful first kiss, and they smile afterwards as well. They both have a sparkle in their eye to the point where it seems like the two of them have an affinity for each other. They're dancing and they're staring into each other's eyes as people are watching them. And they've done a great job and they've made it all the way through, right? So it's time for them to say goodbye to their guests. Lady Danbury introduces herself to the queen, lets her know that I'm a member of your court. The queen is like, oh, great, we shall be great friends. And she says, yes, just try to be careful. She also tells her, Lady Danbury says, if you send for me, I shall come, which shows how their dynamic of friendship developed. They then get in the carriage and they ride home to Beyonce's Halo. Everything is going okay until Charlotte realizes that she's going to live one place and George is going to live in another. He's like, this is your house. She says, if this is my house, is it not also our house? He says, I suppose officially St. James Palace is our house, but this is where you shall stay. And you shall stay here because I have an estate in Kew. She says, so you shall live in Kew? He says, yes. She says, and I shall live here? He says, yes. She said, it is our wedding night. He says, then it's late and you've been traveling and I should let you get inside. You'll need to meet your staff. You will want to get some sleep. She says, no, George, it is our wedding night. We are married. Are we not supposed to do what married people do? He says, are you demanding I perform my marital duty to you? She says, I am not demanding. I am not even sure what marital duty is. I just know, do we not spend the night together? My governor said that is what happens on our wedding night. He says, fine, I shall stay. She says, George. He says, I said I shall stay. Are you coming? As they're walking in the building, because this is her first time meeting her whole staff and they're newly married, everybody's clapping and she's running behind him saying, George, 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 I can't keep up with you. Slow down. He says, you wanted me in the bedroom. Is that not where I should be? She says, no. He says, no. She says, no, if you're going to behave, you are angry. What is wrong? What have I done? Whatever it is, I am sorry. He says, you have done nothing to be sorry for. I just want to go to Kew. She says, so let's go to Kew. He says, no, she says, you do not want me to go to Kew. He says, this is your home. She says, and that is yours. He says, yes. She says, I see. He says, you do good. So you're all right. She goes, I am not all right. George, he's walking off. This is how it's to be? This is our marriage? You there and me here? He says, yes. She says, why? I thought it would be, it's easier. She says, for whom? Easier for whom? You or me? He says, I'm not going to debate this with you. I merely want you to understand. She said, you need to tell me. I do not need to tell you anything. I have decided. I am your king. He's yelling. She says, my mistake. I thought you were just George. Forgive me, Your Majesty. Because you guys remember, I read that whole exchange. He told her, I got to be king to everybody else, but to you, I want to be just George. So now he's pulling I'm your king card. And she was like, oh, I'm sorry, Your Majesty. He says, Charlotte. She says, may I withdraw, Your Majesty? Or did you want to say anything else to me? He says, Charlotte, this is for the best. She says, of course, Your Majesty, whatever you wish. And he leaves, and you could tell she's hurt, and the music is tense, and it's like, oh gosh, something's gonna go down. And we see Brimsley, and he is following behind her, and she looks like she wants to break, and she doesn't really want him following her. And he goes, I am wherever you are, your majesty. She says, I am fine. He says, yes, your majesty. She says, you need not follow me. He says, but I shall, your majesty. She says, stop calling me your majesty. He says, you are the queen, your majesty. I cannot call you anything else. She says, then stop following me. He says, I cannot do that. She says, as your queen, I order you to stop following me. He says, it is my sworn duty to take care of you, your majesty, at all times. She says, I do not want you here. I hope in time you'll become used to me, your majesty. Wonderful. We can spend the rest of our lives together, is what she says. And then we flash back to current day. And Brimsley is behind the queen the same way he was back in the young Charlotte days, showing that he has been lingering 5 paces behind her at this point for decades, doing exactly what she said that would end up happening, which is that they would be spending the rest of their lives together. So she walks into a room where all of her children are gathered. It's not even 11 in the morning yet, and she is fussing about how there are still no heirs to the throne. You feel no love with her and her kids. She says, I have virgins to the left of me, whores to the right of me. You have made 0 heirs to the throne. One of her daughters is like, I'm trying. She says, are you really, dearest? I explained everything to you. I drew you pictures. Are you doing it correctly? Making sure he is putting it in the right place. This is supposed to be a serious moment, but the way she talks to them, I couldn't help but laugh. She says the only heir to the throne is dead. The princesses have had no babies. The prince have had a record number of babies, illegitimate whore babies. We had 1 heir, 1 royal, and she is gone. Children, this is a crisis. I've heard from the prime minister on the topic, and worse, Lady Whistledown is talking about it. Interesting how the prime minister isn't worse than Lady Whistledown. Lady Whistledown carries so much weight even in this. She says, which means everyone will be talking about it. It's time to find husbands. It's time to trade in the mistresses for respectable wives. Get started. One of you had better produce the next ruler of the United Kingdom, or your father's line dies with him. Make me a royal baby. You hear, mother, you can't expect us to, and everybody's talking and talking and talking. She says, it's not a difficult task. Your father and I made 15 royal babies all by ourselves. I do not see why the whole lot of you cannot make just one. Then we go back to a young Charlotte who's sitting in the bed by herself and says she should have gone over the wall. We have seen glimpses of Charlotte and how she was then to how she is now. And I think as the series goes on, we'll see why certain things remain and certain things change. Hope you all will stick it out with me. Let me know what you thought of this. Leave your comments down below. There may be parts that I left out. If you want to talk about it, put it down below. Until next time.